Morning! Happy Wednesday. Happy first day of spring, as it turns out.
Yeah, and it's funny though because, spring is here and yet we are getting so much rain. It's so depressing, at least here in Southern California. We are getting quite a bit more than what we usually do, which we can't fully complain with though because we definitely do need it.
Yes.
But yeah, it's just kind of like, oh man, it's depressing. I'm tired. I don't know what to do now.
Yeah, I've gotten so used to the constant sunshine and the constant dryness that this is like, oh, I'm so sad on my life right now. Meanwhile, the Northeast is being bamboozled.
Bombarded.
Bombarded.
They're not being tricked by the snow. They're just getting hit by it. The snow isn't going up to them going, ha ha ha, got all your money. All right.
I was going to say it's being bamboozled by spring.
Oh, I get what you're saying. Okay.
Because, they're like, oh, it's first day of spring. Ha ha, snowstorm. So in that way they are. But yes, they're also being bombarded. I believe a bombogenesis occurred earlier, and I think it's doing it again or something like that.
Oh, God. It's never a dull moment with the weather recently. Well, even some of the folks that join us in chat from Eastern Europe have been saying that they've been getting crazy highs and lows where it'll be, like negative 14 degrees Celsius, and suddenly it's 22 Celsius. And it goes from super cold to super friggin' hot. So it never seems to fail every single time.
Yeah, it's intense. And welcome everybody in chat. How is everybody faring with the weather? Tell us where you're from and what your weather conditions are. But hey, Vargalas Vet, RX Mongo, Denungi, welcome, Touch Me Nancy. Hey everybody, thank you for joining us today. As if you are listening to us on another platform besides Twitch, we do have this particular podcast / YouTube episode is streamed live on Twitch every Wednesday, currently at 11 a.m. Pacific Daylight Time, but that may change in the near future, so stay tuned for that. But certainly come give us a follow at twitch.tv/MindMineTV, and you'll be notified when we go live as soon as we go live. So you'll be able to catch up on that as well. Let's see, Denungi, Ohio, we are covered in snow. Welcome to spring. Ohio, welcome to spring. That's
right, and Vargala out of Rhode Island is expecting snow tonight. Mongo from Colorado, excuse me, wants rain, hasn't seen it yet though.
And Vargala is getting snow tonight. Spring says, hey kid, you want a snow cone?
So yeah, it's a pretty interesting spring, a pretty depressing spring thus far. But again, there's a lot of changes going on overall with our environment, a lot of things happening at this current point in time, and so we're gonna see the effects of it. Most people say because of climate change, global warming, things like that. And of course, at this point in time, it's too late to already go back, right? So now, of course, the goal is to try to figure out, well, what can we do to help kind of curb some of it and not have it go any further? Basically, it's like, all right, we got to suck it up. We got to just accept what we get now, and that our normal cycle of seasons has already changed and will not go back to the same. And now it's just trying to figure out, well, how do we, curb it? How do we stop it from going any further then? So that's something to think about now, folks. And kind of change your mindset about it and just go, okay, well, this is what we have now. There's no going back. There's not worth complaining because that won't do anything, right? It'll just make you angry and wet or angry and cold. So, is what it is at this point. So just got to figure out what you got to do next, of course.
Exactly. And Denungi, thank you so much for the kitty bits. We really, really appreciate that. Thank you again for joining us as well. Look forward to the discussions for today. And what are we talking about today, you ask? Well, today's topics include what makes a good leader. I want to know. You probably want to know too. So we'll talk about that. We're also going to talk about how the arts are taking on the refugee crisis.
And yes, there is still a refugee crisis. It is a crisis. It is ongoing. And so therefore, it's really important to understand what is exactly happening, what the impact is, and how the arts are coming in to share that story.
We'll also talk about creative plagiarism, the dark side of the arts.
I like what you did there. That was very good.
Thank you. I think it's a little foreshadowing there.
A little foreshadowing,
Just a little bit. And lastly, we're going to talk about the drama with ride sharing that's happening across the world.
Not the drama with your mama, but the drama with the Ubers.
Unless your mama drives for Uber, in which case we'll be talking about that as well.
We will be talking about your mama then. But not in a bad way. Hopefully in a way that will save her from a lot of drama. So going into this now, this was actually a topic that was recommended by one of our listeners. They wanted to know, what is it that makes a good leader, and what are some signs of a bad leader or a poor leader? They wanted to know, how can I increase my ability to be an effective leader and really be able to help motivate people rather than, having this kind of disorganized mess and everyone's running around with their heads cut off, basically, like a chicken with their head cut off. So we wanted to hit more on this. So we actually pulled an article that was a great foundation for this topic from the Good Men Project. The author states that to them, a boss is defined as a person who manages people, while a leader inspires others to innovate, think creatively, and strive for greatness. So again, that difference of just purely managing people, are people doing what they need to do? Great. If not, okay, fire them. Or a leader which inspires others to innovate, think creatively, and strive for greatness. Leaders delegate and develop people. And as we go through this discussion, keep those in mind too. Leaders delegate and develop, two major D's there. A recent study actually by Randstad USA found that only 35% of employees actually feel inspired by their boss. So that says a lot right now already about the mindset and the sort of environment that's being created by today's leaders, or by today's bosses, I guess, really, right? Because again, there's that difference between the boss and the leader.
Right.
And then, of course, you have another study that found happiness in employees and in team members led to a 12% spike in productivity. So that, of course, the happier people are in a group, the better the work, the better the output is, right? So at this point, that should say right there that it's not just about, okay, you do this, you do this, you do this, and then if you don't do it, that's your job, or you get reprimanded, and, we put the fear of God into you type of thing. It's, hey, how can we make this a better work environment? How can we make this a place you want to come into every single day? Thus, then, them wanting to go, hey, I feel good, I got all this energy, I feel positive, how can I put this into my work? I feel more invested in the things that I do rather than just feeling I'm another cog in the machine. And I think that's another big thing to think about there.
I just want to touch on 2 points that you just said. The fact that this the recent study by Randstad that talked about 35% of employees feel inspired by their boss. I find that number to be high, actually. That's awesome. It's a full third. That's amazing. I thought it was much much lower. And also Randstad, I mean, they put cogs in machines. That is their job. That's kind of their job.
They do. They're contractor or employee based
placement. Like a placement agency, a temp agency, that sort of thing. So I just thought that was funny.
It's like, out of all the people, and they're going to be saying that. It's interesting, but it's great information to have. And with that information comes from Dr. James, who is the CEO of Intel Legend Corp. He says that there are five mistakes leaders can make. So here are 5 major points that we're going to break down for you. And we're going to not only pull information from the article, but from our personal experience and background, working with many contractors and interns and things like that from our experience with our own digital media company that we've run now for several years. We want to input some of our, baggage into that as well to give you a full picture of what we're talking about here. So of the 5 main points, the first mistake leaders or bosses or people, again, that are ahead of a team can make is poor communication skills. So what they're saying is that poor leaders don't value communication. They don't put enough emphasis on communication, nor do they utilize effective communication themselves, which of course leads to problems. It leads to misunderstandings. Basically unclear expectations will be created, or most people will be unaware of designated goals. So you within this team will not know, well, what are the expectations? What am I actually working toward? Why am I doing said project or task that I was assigned? That is unclear to you, so therefore you're not sure where to go with it. It could slow things down. It could slow processes down. Or people could be doing the wrong bit of work, right? They could be investing their time into a wrong portion that they shouldn't be because things were not clear enough. And then, of course, bosses overall, instead of having these communication issues, need to be active listeners, need to be fluid thinkers, and need to be able to communicate. So, good communication skills, that isn't just about how effectively you speak, but also how effectively you listen, take in that information, and be able to then answer back out to the individual. So whether it's, a clarifying statement or just directly answering the questions that they have. Now, you've been in HR for years and stuff, and you've worked within many cube farms and businesses and everything. So, what is your experience with communication skills, especially with leadership?
It is very important. Communication skills are important, I think, really at any level, at any interaction with anybody ever, whether it's in your professional or personal life. You need to be able to communicate, right? Because we are not mind readers.
I've been working on it for years, but still hasn't kicked in yet.
And there's also different levels of communication skills as well, right? You've got your... you've got the verbal, obviously, the words that are coming in your mouth, but also the tone, sort of other behavioral cues as well. And what I found is exactly good leaders have amazing communication skills. Sometimes they even over communicate, and that's totally fine, right? Because it's better to have more information than not in some instances. But people who are just a boss and they're kind of not very good at being a boss don't know how to communicate, whether because they've never been taught it or they don't believe that communication is actually necessary for the team to work. I have all this information and I don't want to tell you about it. It's like, yeah, but that piece of information might make things go better, right? So we do have actually held trainings for how to communicate. When is a good time to communicate? What should you communicate, and that kind of thing. But at the end of the day, I feel like you don't even have to be in a position of authority or a position of leadership to have good communication skills. And in fact, a lot of coordinator level type jobs actually require an amazing skill set for communication, because you have to be, keeping all these different little moving parts going and communicating with each other, if you will.
Well, and in the entertainment industry too, they say that, of course, 90% of the process of having an effective production is in the auditioning process, right? The 90% is basically just finding the right people. Mm-hmm. But that last 10% is all communication, right? And that you can then put into any single type of industry. You find the right people, yes. And yes, ideally they should know their job to a point and understand what their position is and ask the right questions as well. Not just being told everything, but also them asking. But at the same time, you still need that other 10%, which is so important to, again, tell people what our expectations, where are we going? Where do we see this going in the next week, 5 weeks, 10 months, in the next 5 years? So that way people get a really better or get a clear idea of next steps. And ideally, if you get these people invested enough, they're going to want to share their ideas for growth as well and help expand and enrich the current foundation. But they cannot do that, and they cannot offer that energy and those ideas if you are not clear to them on what the expectations are, why you're doing what you're doing. Again, it's about showing value and giving value. And what's amazing to me is there are so many businesses, so many different companies and organizations that their focus for their customers or for those that they provide services to, they're always worried about the value for them. But then they always forget about the value for their employees or for their team members. And that actually translates, and that you should never forget that. That the concepts, ideas, and the psychology that you put into how to connect to your target core demographic or your audience is the same that you need to utilize for your employees, for your team members. But for whatever reason, there's always this disconnect. And I think it's just because of the amount of pressure on making money, on making sales. And so then the focus is always on the customer and almost never on the employees. And people have, a lot of corporations have struggled with that issue too.
Yeah, that's a great point. They forget that, they do all this talking to the customer, that they forget that they also have another customer, and that's their employees. And they need to be doing some talking with them too.
Yes, exactly.
And I will say with the communication skills, it's not just a set it and forget it. You don't just hold one meeting a year to let people know what's going on and to, tell them what the goals are and have that meeting of like, all right, you're going to do this, you're going to do that. Perfect, good, we're all set, everybody's on the same page. You have to have constant communication, right? Like at regular intervals and not, always just about, I would say work-related things, right? Like treat them as a person, but we'll get into that a little bit later on as well.
Exactly right. And welcome to those of you that are just joining us in chat, such as I believe it's Cade568. Thank you very much for joining us, and many others who are just now hanging out with us. Today's topics are in the chat there, and we're just covering 5 signs of poor leaders and how you yourself can be a better leader. So we've talked about poor communication skills, and now we're going into point number 2, which is fear of change. So fear of change, important. What this is that you have as a leader, you have to think about, do I have the willingness to be able to go with the flow? If certain obstacles or certain things come up that get in my way, am I able to adapt and to change things? So it's really important to embrace unfamiliar things and face changes head on. As the saying goes, the only constant is change. Change is constantly happening, and especially if you're looking at it from a business standpoint, within the US, it is all about competition, right? Again, ideally, you have this kind of consumeristic economy where the goal is constant competition leads to constant innovation. And so you want to be able to flex a little bit and be able to manipulate and change where it's important to again, keep up with that competition and constantly innovate. Poor leaders typically are unwilling to alter their perspectives and a lot of times dismiss ideas that aren't their own. So basically they have this mentality of, well, I'm the leader, I'm the boss, so you know what I say goes because I'm bringing in this certain level of experience. And then, yeah, that's nice that you brought in that idea, but it's not my idea, so we're not going to go with it. So a lot of times, what we need to remember is that we bring on people who technically are supposed to be smarter than ourselves, right? They're the ones that are supposed to be filling in where we can't fill in or do what we can't do as leaders. And so it's really important to be able to embrace change. Otherwise, we're going to be left behind. It's that clear and simple. So you have to be open-minded, stay flexible, and be willing to listen to ideas from others. So what are your thoughts on this concept of this fear of change, of, again, seeing how poor leadership can basically make things feel like you're in a straitjacket, right? Like it's just too tight. I can't really do anything. I can't maneuver. I'm just kind of stuck.
It's definitely not a quality that you want in a leader because, as you mentioned, the only constant is change. Things change all the time, especially when it comes to the business landscape, right? You've got to adapt to survive. If you look at any of the top companies right now, right, you're like, going to say, oh man, they must have amazing leaders. They're probably just doing the same thing over and over again, getting the same better results. It's like, no, that's not how that works, right? If you follow the trajectory of a particular company from when it was first, from its inception to now, they've made a shit ton of changes, right? I mean, Apple changes its iPhone every 3 months. That you have to change. You have to be open to trying new things. And that's not to say, great, you listen to everybody's idea and you implement everybody's idea. No, what we're saying is you have to be open that things are going to change, that some of your team might actually have better ideas than you, but also be willing to go out and make changes yourself as well. See how you can innovate, see where you can change. And again, not to the detriment of everything else. We're not saying, you have to try a new idea out every week, every day, but you have to realize when, wow, this is no longer working, we need to figure out a way to change it, and either seek out people who can help you brainstorm some new things, or you yourself sit there and be like, how can I do this different? How can I improve this? And not be afraid to make those changes, whether they lead to failures or successes, right? But if you stay stagnant, someone else is going to come up from behind you and lap you,
Well, and it's interesting too, because again, as Kate says in chat, that change is effective when it's used the right way. But unfortunately, there are many like tech companies, for example, who are all about innovation. We've got to keep innovating. We've got to hack the system basically. And
right. Disrupt the industry. And so often that becomes their goal. It never becomes the goal of, well, let's see how we can innovate to better what people are experiencing or doing. But it just becomes, well, it just has to be a disrupting idea. And it's like, well, wait a minute, that's not what the focus should be. Ideally, you just have a good enough idea that it disrupts. It's like people who go, well, I want to do something viral. I want to create a viral video. Well, you do realize most of the time that the things that become viral by accident. There was no intent of making it viral. It just hit with a certain emotional nerve to the viewer, and it connected with them enough where it became viral. It's kind of like the saying from Lord of the Rings, one does not simply walk into Mordor. It's like, one does not simply just say, hey, my goal is to make something viral. It's about making the content. So with this too, it's like, well, my goal is not to disrupt, but make a good enough idea or system or service that it will disrupt. But people seem to put the cart before the horse, and then they get ahead of themselves, and then you get a lot of issues from there. Right, well, everybody wants to be top number one, 5 bajillion million subscribers and viewers kind of person, and it's hard to it's hard to actually get the pathway there, right? You just want to be at the end somehow. Let's just do it, and it's like, okay, well, but that doesn't mean every single day you try something that is disruptive, as it were.
Yeah, it's like that should never be your end goal. The end goal is how you're impacting your clients, how you're impacting your employees, ideally. So, there's two things. One is not to be too strict with the fear of change and saying, no, I will never change. But there's also the other polar, which is I'm going to constantly change, or my goal is just simply change, rather than what is the overall goal that for my client, for my employees. Now, the third point here is lack of empathy. So, again, for many reasons, because we get stuck in our own heads, if we get really busy with what's going on, we have our own bosses or our own team leaders coming down on us, right? Going, okay, well, what are the numbers looking like? Are we getting enough sales? Are we getting enough profit? What is our, ratio of this and that looking like? That we constantly, as leaders, get stuck in our own heads, and it becomes very difficult to then, in a way, empathize with our own team members or with our employees. And so it's really important to understand that employees, just like us, are multifaceted individuals. They have a life outside of work obligations. So not only should they not be required to work 24/7, but we have to keep in mind that life comes up and we have to be respectful of that too.
Wait, you're saying employees are people?
They are. I know, right? We haven't yet wiped them off the map and replaced them with, automation.
Oh, not yet. But we did talk about that in previous episodes. Check them out.
So that is a possibility right in the future. But, right now they are real people and they go through real things. And we have to remember that. And we have to remember, too, that a lot of times they will bring some of that baggage with them to work. And now, as much as it is their responsibility to handle things properly, sometimes stuff does come up, and it's important then to, as we talked about point number 1, have strong communication skills, communicate with them because you can empathize with them rather than just scolding them or firing them because of one minor mishap or, whatever change of attitude. So don't dismiss issues that everyday people face. You face them too. The other thing is understand the different situations your team members are involved with. So understanding their position, understanding their tasks, not just your own, and realizing that a lot of what they have to go through and a lot of the obstacles they face are very different than yours as a leader. And so you might not be able to connect with those obstacles, but you got to be willing to communicate, empathize, and better understand those obstacles as well. And then, of course, they say, again, leaders must understand problems of team members and remove barriers to entry so everyone can do the best job. So what they're really saying is that, emotionally intelligent leaders increase productivity, their retention, and their happiness. So, again, and this all kind of, you'll notice that with all 5 of these points, they all kind of circle in to one another.
Yes, because you have to be a full person, if you will, right? Like you can't, there isn't just like a one thing you have to do when you're a great leader, right? It's multifaceted, right? Because a leader is a person who has multiple skills, if you will, right? Multiple talents, multiple skills, that sort of thing. I think that having empathy, again, goes back to that whole communication skills point, which is we as people in general would do better in our lives, I think, if we had more empathy. And if you have amazing empathy, great, keep on at it, right? But you have to understand that the people that you're working with on a team or even strangers you come across that you're trying to get them to do something for you, right? You have to understand that they are people and that you have to treat them at least, the very least, the way you would want to be treated, right? And if you were working for somebody and they didn't understand that you were a person and they didn't have empathy for you and your situations, you wouldn't want to work with them, right? You wouldn't listen to them. You wouldn't want to do what they want you to do. You'd start to stop caring about what it is that you're doing at that job, right? So, okay, now you're the leader. Think about that when you talk to your team, right? You used to be there. You used to be in that position. What did you expect from your boss? Or what did you expect from a leader when you look up to someone like that, right? So, and that is empathy, just even thinking about that. But then also actually caring about and realizing that you're dealing with people is an important skill.
And if you're having issues with empathizing with those within your team, again, going back up to step 1, communication. So then speak to them, ask them, what is it that you're looking for from this group, from this team? What is it that I can do better to help you so that way you can innovate, so that you can feel like you have a space where you can be happy and successfully work in? What can I bring to the table based on my skills to help you grow as an individual? What are your goals specifically outside of the project, outside of everything else? As an individual here, what do you want from this experience? And then I would then adjust how we work, again, then going into step 2, that fear of change. So then I would go through and kind of change up the foundation that we have or some of the tasks that we have. So if someone says, you know what, honestly, I'm just not much of a number cruncher, that just really isn't my thing, then I'm not going to give it to someone who feels like they hate that kind of thing, right? That only makes the situation worse. So I've communicated with them. I've learned that, certain analytical tasks might not be the best for them. So then I don't give that to them. So then I change up what I was originally going to do, and I will pass it off to someone else who enjoys more of the analytical processing than they do, for example. And so again, you empathize by learning through communication. And then from there, you change the course slightly, or adjust or add on or adapt, if you will, that course to then make it so that way you have a more effective impact.
And I have to say, something that really struck me from this particular article, and when they were talking about this, having empathy, basically being a good leader and having empathy, is the removal of barriers to entry so that everyone can do their best job. Mm-hmm. I think that's really key as well, because that's what teachers do all the time, right? Good teachers, what they should be doing is they need to remove those barriers for the students to actually do their best job, right? So whether that's presenting a topic in a particular way that makes more sense to that particular student, or having an engaging game that they can all play that can help explain a more complex theory, that kind of thing, right? That, to me, is also a good leader, a teacher that knows how to bring the best in their students, or a director that knows how to bring the best in her actors, or a writer who knows how to bring out the emotions in a reader. You have all of these examples where this removal of these obstacles that people can just easily get into what you're doing, go along and do the best job that they know how to do with their skill sets, right? So I thought that was really cool. I don't think that people talk about that a lot. There's actually a tennis pro, he's also very good at teaching as well, and I'm gonna butcher his name right now, but I believe it's Arthur Ashe.
Yeah, Arthur Ashe.
Arthur Ashe. And he was, his method of teaching tennis to people is, he gives them the racket, he gives them the ball, and he's just like, just focus on the ball. That's it. That's all you got to do. Just focus on it. And just hit the ball. Just make your racket connect with the ball. Don't worry about where it's going to land. Don't worry about how you're standing. Don't worry about where the other player is. The very first thing you have to do is look at this ball, make the racket connect to it. And within like a few minutes, people like basically improve 80% at tennis because of that. Because he's removed all the other barriers, where's the player at? What am I wearing? How am I standing? Who else is watching me? What's going on tomorrow? What am I having for dinner? He's like, just think about the ball and the racket. That's all you got to do.
Yeah, exactly.
I thought that was cool.
Again, start small and then make it more elaborate, right? Build up from there. You got to start with something smaller if you're not familiar with what you're working in. Because if you throw something too complex at someone, they're not going to get it right away, right? I mean, we see this actually because we're on Twitch. So, we see this with video games. Yes, more elaborate and complex games do tend to get more hardcore players, more people involved and engaged. But there is a steep learning curve. We see this with many different games. Like, for instance, Warframe can be considered a part of that, actually. And we have a lot of Warframe players in chat right now. But, that is one of them, for instance, or Escape from Tarkov, or some of these other games where, again...
Fortnite.
Well, I wouldn't say Fortnite is really that extreme. But, getting toward there, where, again, if you have a steep learning curve, it can be difficult. And so you got to get people motivated. But if you start smaller sometimes, or if people start in that initial phase... they'll be able to grow with it a lot better. And also, Cade says, I agree with that, such as the teachers could perhaps explain in a way that suits the student best. So if you're a teacher, you're trying to, and again, I'm an educator as well. I do a lot of teaching and instructor work. So, for me, I always try to take that in mind. Whenever I have my first class with students, I will tell them, I will say, hey, look, this is what my goals for the class are, but they might not match yours because I am not you. I'm the one with the information. I want to give it to you. And I'm not doing my job if you're not learning and you're not getting out of this what you want. So then I will have them go around, introduce themselves, and tell me, what are some of your expectations for this class? What do you want to take away from this? And I will see what I can do without throwing everything else off or not giving focus to things that really need the focus. I will see how I can change and adapt the course of the class so that way we at least touch base and you get an initial kind of handshake with that information. So that way you can then take that information and either search for it later on or take another course later on that helps elaborate further on that. And I think that's really the key of it, but unfortunately we as teachers don't give enough value to the students. We just say, well, look, you're supposed to learn because it gets you a job and then you get paid. But as we've learned in this economy, that's not the way it is.
Oh, that is no.
We have some of the highest unemployment rates and underemployment rates, meaning that people are working, say, fast food jobs rather than being a neuroscientist, but that's what they went to school for. And so because of that, we need to give them additional value. So how can you implement this in your life? How can you implement this to make a project successful, among other things? Again, that goes back to those communication skills, being able to take on change and empathizing with the people that you're speaking with directly. And then our next point, the fourth point of the 5 points here for leadership, is that poor leaders cannot be self-centered. And if you're self-centered, you're not going to be able to empathize, right? So, poor leaders don't understand service above self. They won't obtain trust, confidence, and loyalty from those they lead. Now, visionary leaders let go of their ego and self-serving habits. So they listen more, speak less. Again, as I go back to effective communication skills, because everything is a cycle. They all bleed into one another. You listen more, speak less, but when you do speak, you speak effectively because you've listened.
I'm sorry, what?
Exactly.
That is true. Well, what they say, you got 2 ears and 1 mouth. That means you got to listen twice as much as you talk.
Oh, there you go. That is right. Yeah. That's a good saying. Yeah, I forgot about that one. Throwback.
Throwing them. I was going to say proverbs, but I don't think that's a proverb. Maybe. I don't know. And hey, welcome, Did You Know Gaming. Thank you for joining us. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up on chat right now. That's all I had to say.
Oh, okay. That kind of suspenseful, dramatic, peak there. But yeah, so, really it is about listening. It is about refining, kind of what you've already built, which is what Did You Know Gaming is saying in chat here. And then again, not being about you. So again, it's not about thinking, okay, well, if the group as a whole succeeds, that makes me look like a really good leader, and that makes me then get a raise, get a bonus. And I don't care what the other people get, right? No, the focus should really be on, okay, well, when we succeed, we all succeed, and this is why. And again, overall, it's not about I succeeding as in I get the raise or I don't get fired, but it's the fact of like, what is the goal of the project overall? What is the goal in the first place? Is it to create a service that's more cost effective and better assists our clients? Great, then that is our goal through and through. It should never be about, well, what else can I do to make myself look really good? Or what credit can I take in order to look good for my higher ups? So that way, whatever this project goes through, I don't care, because at least I'll still look good. And if anything does go wrong, I can just blame it on someone underneath me. Because that's not, again, how that works. And other people see that. Again, a group of people together who are working with each other constantly, they're not stupid. They're going to see these things. They're going to point them out to one another and go, you know what? This doesn't work. And you're going to see a lot of issues. You're going to see the breakdown of communication then between the team and the team leader. And then from there, you're going to see the team doing their own thing or not doing anything because they don't see the value. They don't feel like they're being treated fairly. And therefore, there goes the loyalty. There goes the trust and the confidence that they originally had.
And I think you see, some of this lack of self-centeredness that a good leader needs to have when you watch a movie that you really, really enjoy, right? Because at that point, you're not thinking necessarily about oh, wow, that director did such a great job. You're just like, wow, this movie was fucking fantastic. That actor was so good. Those CGI was so amazing. This, and that. And that's exactly the hallmarks of a great leader, right? They've worked with a team, and he or she has allowed that team to be their best, and has probably has had to compromise maybe on some of their visions for that particular movie, because the sum of the parts is greater, than just their ego. And that is so true in a company as well. Now, obviously, there's companies where the leader is the mascot, if you will. Like we think a lot about Steve Jobs and Apple, for example, or Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook. Where they are the mascots. But in a lot of companies that put out products that you use on an everyday basis that you absolutely love, like, you don't know who the CEO is, right? You just know that this company's putting out a great product. And that leader isn't really somebody that seeks that spotlight on themselves necessarily. They just want the team, the whole, to do really good. And they understand that it's very important to actually surround yourself with capable people, right? Like, you yourself are one person. You cannot do everything, especially the bigger the company, the bigger the project, right? Like, there's just no way, unless you clone yourself, it's not going to happen. So you have to select people who are not only, you not only have to select people that are good at what they do, but also then trust that they're going to do a good job. Let them do it. Talk with them, remove those barriers so that they can do the best job. Have communication skills. Tell them, here's the goal, but maybe don't be so micromanaging on how to get there. That sort of thing.
Exactly right. And from there, too, again, the last point is, to wrap up this specific topic, would be number 5, which is a lack of focused vision. So no vision signifies no leadership. Again, the leader has to be the one who sees ahead of it all, right? They are basically, to go off of, again, another big trending game, which is Sea of Thieves right now, right? Where you can run around and be a pirate with a group of people and stuff like that. You as the captain, you're steering the ship, right? You're the one with the map and the one with the what is it called? The telescope, and you're looking out ahead of you to see what direction you're going, where is the next destination. And so that has to happen from a leader perspective, right? You have to have that plan in advance, and you're the one who has to know before anyone else, and better than anyone else, where you're going in the next week, the next 5 months, the next 5 years. So that way you know what needs to change, what needs to adapt, what type of people do you need involved, what type of actions can be cut away because maybe they're just making you spin your wheels in the wrong way, and therefore you're losing energy and focus that you could be putting somewhere else. So again, you have to have that vision. You have to know where you're going and other potentials of where you could go based on how things grow or evolve potentially. And the other thing is that effective leaders aim to implement innovative ideas to kind of go off of this. So they need to keep things fresh, dynamic, competitive, and growing because, again, you're going to have a lot of competition if you're looking at it from a business perspective. You're going to have a ton more people coming in trying to get your share from the industry. So how do you make things different? How do you stay competitive? How do you do something different so that way you're not being confused with your competitors? Because that's the worst. Because I tell you what, I've seen so many ads and so many commercials where, yeah, I remember them because they were creative and they communicated to a point something interesting and they did a good job of it. I don't know what company it was. Like for these car commercials, I'm like, I don't know. It could have been a Chevy. It could have been a Ford. It could have been a Hyundai. I have no clue, right? If I'm not really paying attention and I don't see the very end where they show the car driving off with the logo, like, to me, so many of them look and sound the same. And even if they are creative, I'll remember the ad. Like, for instance, with so many of the Super Bowl commercials, I'll remember the ad. I won't remember the company because I've already seen a million of them and they're not very clear on who they are. So again, knowing how to stand out from that crowd and not just be a sheep within the herd is really, really important. And then, of course, you got to be able to be the person that motivates people toward that ultimate goal or destination. So again, constantly reminding people why they're doing what they're doing and getting excited when you succeed. And when you don't succeed and you do hit a hurdle, going, okay, well, this is how we can grow from it. This is how we can move past it then, rather than getting so upset at the obstacle itself. Because I know I've mentioned this story before in the past, when we talked about handling regrets. We did this episode actually, I think back in December. But basically what we had said was that, so many people carry issues or problems with them and never let them go. So then the issue just keeps kind of growing and growing and growing, when they could have just let it go in the first place and been able to already move and progress much further than they are right now. And I think that's the issue with many leaders a lot of times, is that they forget that. They hold on to the failures and not enough onto the successes, and they don't think about and adapt quickly enough. Again, talking about that change once again, going back to point 2, about how can we change and alter things then so we can fix it. It's like, all right, we have an issue, but talking about it for the next 5 hours doesn't solve anything. So let's talk about solutions. Let's talk about next steps then to help us progress. And I think that's really one of the biggest things. Not losing that vision, not losing that drive, being able to instill that vision and drive into the others that you work with, and highlighting that ultimate goal.
Yes, and did you know gaming has a great point in chat as well? When you saturate a goal with everyone else's desires, the whole pool gets muddy. And then we don't know where we're going because we can't see. And I think that's also, to me, what separates not just a good leader, but really a leader versus not a leader, is somebody who is able to say, okay, I want to go right there. Let's do it, and makes that decision. Because there's so many people who I feel like, do go through life who don't have that desire to say, oh, I want to go do that, and let me find a group of people who want to follow me, right? They just they're okay with certainly being shown a goal and then sort of kind of told, okay, let's go that way. And they're like, okay, great. Like, I have the skill set to make that happen, right? Like, they don't want the responsibility of saying, I want to go there because what if it does fail, right? Then I made a mistake and I don't want to say that, right? So, having a leader that has a vision, has that executive decision-making power of, yes, this is the way we're going to go. And then, right, if it doesn't work out, okay, that didn't work. Let's course correct. We're going to go that way now. Mm-hmm. And move on and not beat the dead horse. Because, as we were talking earlier, failures are just stepping stones to success. If you look, again, at the trajectory of any successful company right now, if you look back at its history, they've had plenty of failures, Macy's, when they first started out, I think, went bankrupt. They had to close down their first official store. I mean, they were a mess. They got sold, they got bought. But now it's like Macy's, like everywhere you go, they're this giant, right?
Oh, yeah.
So, but a leader has to have that ability to say, okay, we're going to go over there. And if it doesn't work, shit, we're going to go over here. And if that works, great, let's keep going in this direction. Oh, some other things are happening around me. How can we make this better? And stay at the top.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, RX Mongo brings up a great point too. He says, I also think a good quality in a leader is actually understanding that not everyone is a leader, and being able to somewhat relate and understand that. It goes back to not thinking you're the best and able to listen to others. And that's absolutely true. And it can be very difficult where people, again, I think this goes back to the empathizing, right? Where they go, well, if it was me, I would have just taken the initiative already. I would have jumped on this, or I would have asked these specific questions. Why didn't they ask these questions? Well, instead of festering on that and getting frustrated with it, bring it up to them then and talk to them and better understand, like, hey, I saw that you didn't ask me these questions, but it seems to be something that you're getting hung up on. Is there something I can help elaborate on, or help me help you? Let me understand your situation right now. Is this an obstacle? Is this an issue? Okay, then let's work out how we can get a plan together so that way you can better take these on. Because again, you got to understand that not everyone is you. And even though you are a leader because of very specific qualities that you've shown, hopefully, not everyone has those same qualities. And it doesn't make them any less of a person or any better of a person. Oh, wow. It just makes them different because you have a different skill set. So therefore, you need to be able to take that in and be able to better understand it yourself. So it's like, communication isn't just about effectively telling someone something so they understand it, but it's about also pushing for more information within a dialogue so that way you also better understand a situation. And you can effectively ask those questions to get someone talking so that way you get the idea of what's happening and how you can build off of that.
Right. And right, to your point, not everyone is a leader, and that's okay. We've all heard of the other saying, too many chefs in the kitchen. You can't have just a bunch of leaders because and they're just going to be talking about stuff and nothing's going to get done.
And I'm sure plenty of people who have been, in the office can attest to that. There are several businesses I know of, I could think of, where it's just all meetings. And it's just all people talking at each other, but nothing actually gets done.
Right. You need some doers and some... You need some followers, not just leaders, basically. And it's okay to be comfortable in whatever, sort of position that you want to be in. Now, obviously, if you're working towards being a leader of a company, again, you can lead different things without being a boss, if that makes sense, right? Like, you don't necessarily need the title to inspire people to do their best, and you don't need the title to innovate and really even strike out on your own if you want to, right? Like, at that point, you can be your own boss. But you don't have to be in a particular position of authority to be a leader as well.
Yes.
And you can, even things you volunteer for, you can be a leader in, in your own family, you can be a leader. So really it's looking at, if you have those qualities, if you want to have that sort of aspect be part of your life, that leadership aspect, you can find it in a variety of different places, and you can create that for yourself as well. As I'm sure you know, because you're a leader.
Yeah, and I really appreciate that too. It's like, just because you don't have the title or just because you don't get the certain pay grade or whatever, you could still be a leader. It doesn't take a certain title to make you a leader. And again, as the saying goes too, lead by example. So basically, put into the world or put into the project or put into whatever you want what you think should be put into it. And what you kind of want out of it, basically. You put good in the world to get good out, ideally. And it just depends on how you go about it and what you do. And really, at that point, it's just about expectation, Like, not everything is going to meet expectations, but it doesn't mean you didn't do a good job of setting an example and taking on that leadership role, no matter what it is.
Exactly. And hello, welcome everybody who's just joined us in chat. Just wanted to read some of these amazing comments here, and before we move on to the next topic, yes, JD, there's a difference between a leader and a manager. Exactly. James Plays and Talk says a title is given, not taken. Glad to hear that you're enjoying our talk. Welcome to the channel. All right, so for the next topic that we're going to be talking about.
Actually, this is perfect too, because we talked about, basically effective communication and setting an example no matter who you are or what you're doing. And I think this next topic really hits on leadership exactly the same, even though it's, focused on a different thing, but you could see a lot of leadership from this, and a lot of humanitarian leadership, especially from this next topic, which is really, really cool.
Yes. So Ai Weiwei, who is one of the most high-profile Chinese artists and also a political activist, has just launched a new work called Law of the Journey to highlight the plight of refugees. And I'm going to put up an image of that in our Twitch chat. If you are listening on Podbean or iTunes, feel free to head on over to twitch.tv/MindMineTV, and you can actually check out our VOD, our past video broadcast of this. You can actually see the image yourself. But basically, this new work is a 200-foot-long boat that contains over 300 figures made from the very materials that are used in making dinghies, those rafts that help refugees kind of travel across the Mediterranean. And it's currently viewable at the Sydney Biennale, hopefully I'm saying that right, in Sydney, Australia. because Ai Weiwei thought that Australia was a perfect place to showcase this art, because the country has a controversial policy of detaining unauthorized boat arrivals of these asylum seekers. And he says that the current refugee situations that we see in the world right now, we truly reflects the current state of the human condition. And every nation, has got to come out with some answer on how we look at humanity, at the human race, how we deal with these refugees. He says, and I quote, "We cannot disassociate our connections to other human beings, the suffering and the tragic life of our global human community." And he's right. Like, right now, we're witnessing a massive shift of humanity, unlike that we've ever seen before, right? There's more than 65 million people around the world. 65 million people globally, which is equivalent, if you don't know, to the entire population of the UK.
Oh, just of the UK. Oh, okay.
Yeah, that are displaced from their homes. So more than 65 million people that are displaced from their homes. And almost half of them, more than 23 million of them, are actually just from 5 places. Almost half. That's Syria, Afghanistan, South Sudan, the Lake Chad Basin, and Somalia. It'd be like half of the population of Spain going homeless. Right? Everyone in Cameroon fleeing and leaving an empty nation behind. The state of Florida, slowly draining of every doctor, teacher, engineer, entrepreneur, everybody who's lived there, plus 3 million more, until there was only just barren land left there, right? That's an incredible amount of people. Syria has had 11.5 million people displaced just since 2011, after war erupted. South Sudan has had 4 million displaced since this brutal civil war in 2013. Afghanistan has had 3.8 million displaced. 1.2 million looks like we're displaced kind of just internally in the country, but 2.6 million have actually been forced to leave the country. And the UN estimates that about 1,000 Afghans are fleeing their homes every day. Every day, 1,000 people. And this is due to years of unemployment and insecurity, political instability. Lake Chad has had 2.3 million people displaced due to upheaval and food insecurity. Can you imagine not being able to have food to eat? So all right, well, I gotta go find some food somewhere else, and then
let me find a
grocery stores in a different country.
Yeah, let me go to the next biggest country and see if I can get some food. Yeah, that's insane.
And Somalia has had 1.6 million people displaced due to famine, drought, and of course, ongoing conflicts. So Ai Weiwei has, wanted to use art to bring awareness to this refugee crisis, because the crisis is ongoing. And I was talking earlier with Evin, I feel like it's, in some ways, it's been ongoing since the beginning of time. That's why people migrated across continents, right? There was resource scarcity. It wasn't just I want to go visit some new place and take some photos on my phone, right? They were we need food, we need this, we need better environment for our children, for myself. And it worked out well for them. But right now, where we're sort of seeing there's more people in the world, there's less resources than ever before. When refugees seek asylum somewhere else, they're often looked upon like they did something wrong, and they're looked upon don't come here and take my stuff away, So it really is a truly a crisis, not only because there's so many more people because of everything that's happening in the world, but also in some ways there's less places to go and be able to have others to take care of them, because those areas are already populated. Mm-hmm. Is what I'm trying to get at.
Now, also too, so you're of course from Romania. We've mentioned this a couple times on stream and in the podcast, and it sounds like to me, and let me get your thoughts on this, but it sounds like a lot of these refugees also get treated kind of like the gypsies have been treated within Eastern Europe, especially around Romania and what have you. So, I mean, what can you share with us kind of the views of what people have had on gypsies and gypsy culture and what have you? Because I think it'll help people also from a smaller scale then enhance it onto these larger population of refugees and how they're being viewed as right now.
Yeah, so, well, when I was growing up, the gypsies, as you see my air quotes if you're just listening on audio, but the gypsies, that as they were called in Romania, were really just a nomadic people, I think, at first, where they didn't really settle in one place and they traveled to and fro. And oftentimes they traveled, at least some of the ones that I met, were traveling with some, I don't want to say circuses, but just like traveling entertainment, if you will. Yeah. And but eventually, you know, a lot of them decided to sort of set up shop in major towns. And so I lived in one of the northeast towns there, and happened to meet a few of them. But basically, because they didn't, you know, have a history of a secure, stable job or, you know, a house or something like that, everyone just kind of looked at them like, oh, they're just leeches. They're, you know, they're here to like steal our stuff, our food, and they're here to, you know, rape our girls and, you know, influence our boys in a bad ways. And that wasn't really true. So I met a group of them that actually lived in the same houses. It was a large group of them, I think maybe 10 or so, that lived in a house behind where my parents worked. And so, you know, one day I went and kind of just hung out with some of the kids there. And I mean, they're people. Surprise. And they just had some, you know, interesting life stories. Some of the situations they found themselves in were by choice, but others were by, you know, environment, life happening to them, you know, and they too wanted the best for their children, and they too wanted the best for themselves, but they just couldn't really fit in the society, or didn't want to fit in the society that they were a part of. And so they sort of lived on the fringes. But, you know, and just like everybody else wasn't a gypsy, you know, you had your smart ones, you had your not so smart ones, you had your funny people and the not funny people, the clever, the everything like that. So, but they were all clumped, you know, by our society. They were all just sort of clumped as these like dirty individuals who didn't know how to hold down a job. And that wasn't the case.
And what's interesting, too, is that let's say they were, you know, they stayed put and they were in the country that they wanted to be in, right? They weren't shifting over boundaries or anything like that. They would just be considered, I don't know, people, right? And that's the interesting thing. Now, with these refugees, too, if they were still in Sudan or Syria or Afghanistan, they would just be people of Afghanistan, people of Syria, people of South Sudan, some of them lawyers, some of them doctors, some of them teachers, some of them just, you know, stay-at-home parents and family members that would help take care of the family. And yet all of a sudden they're being pulled out of their country because they're getting bombed or getting shot at or getting pushed out by their government or by outside parties, outside factions, maybe trying to overthrow the current system. And all of a sudden, they're these refugees. Oh, these terrible people. They're going to kill and steal and do all this stuff. But it's like, there's no proof of that. And it's just all this kind of fear-mongering, it feels like. And it's really disheartening in a way. It feels sad because, like, these people, yeah, you're going to get some people that are great and some people that aren't great. But that's in every single society. I can walk downtown LA right now and find some absolutely, you know, great people, some fantastic people who, you know, want to do great things. I'm going to find people who, you know, are just comfortable, just not really doing much at all, and that's their deal. And I'm going to find people who are absolute assholes. And the thing is that, you know, especially the negative aspect, you know, those people that can be absolute assholes, a lot of times they actually have money and are, you know, able to do a lot of things within our society. So it's just like, and again, that's not a dig at people who are a certain scale of wealth, but just in general, because we tend to also look down on those who have fallen on hard luck. But a lot of times the people that we say are lucky actually have a lot of those negative qualities that we fear in those that aren't so lucky. There's a big kind of irony here that I feel like needs to be kind of pointed out too. But all these people are families and professionals and everything. I mean, they're from all spectrums of the society, just like any other society. But they're getting pushed out because they don't want to be killed, or they don't have food, and they're not trying to steal, but they're just trying to survive. And that's one of the biggest things. I mean, we're all about survival instinct. That's how we've gotten this far, thus far.
Thus far. Yeah. And again, it's talking about empathy, right? Just they're people trying to survive. And I hope that none of us and none of you that are listening in chat, I don't want anybody to ever have to experience this for themselves, like to be displaced from your home and having to try to figure out what the next step is, right? Because that's not just like, oh, I moved down the street because my house burned down, but everything else is still here. This is like you're picking up almost not much belongings. You're picking up and you're moving somewhere completely different. Sometimes somewhere where you don't know the language, you don't know the customs. How do you get a job there? How do you then try to provide for your home, for your family, and for yourself? It's something I don't wish on anyone, and unfortunately, it's a crisis now between all these stupid, silly wars that people are doing, and between famine and droughts. I mean, that's not even, well, some of that is man-made, but, things that are just completely out of your control, if a hurricane comes and destroys the land you're living on, right, that's not much you can do about that, right? It's rough, and I don't, and to sort of play devil's advocate on, the countries that don't want to help refugees or feel like they're stretched thin. Like, I get it. Like, I get it, right? Let's say something happened down the street from where you live, right? And all of these people lost their homes and you're the only one standing. Sure. I mean, take them in. You're going to give them some food, this and this and that. But eventually your house is going to get overrun, right? And that's the fear, that these refugees will come into a country and they will overrun, like Warhammer, Vermintide 2, and they're just going to be everywhere. And we just have to, my goodness. But it's like those people don't want to steal your shit. They want to have their own house, Those people that you're taking into your own home, they want their own house. They want their own bed. They want their own stuff. They don't want to be there taking advantage of you and and so I think it's important to really truly understand that, and I think certainly in the U.S., the fear of the immigrant is a thing.
Oh, yeah. We actually had a discussion about that, the fear of the other. And we discussed this, I believe it was back in one of January's episodes, where the Pope was saying again that we should be more mindful of these people and not be afraid of them just because they're the other. They've been othered or ostracized by certain political leaders or factions or anything like that. And real quick, too, I just want to say we will be sharing a link toward the end of this conversation, but it will also be in the show notes of the podcast as well as the VOD. But we found actually on YouTube a great documentary that actually has Ai Weiwei in it. And he's actually there watching as these dinghies come in with all of these refugees coming across the Mediterranean. And you can see that the first thing they do is get off these dinghies, hit land, and they're comforting each other. And they're, holding their babies, and they're just trying to be there with one another going, oh my God, we survived that. They don't instantly go, okay, who can we rob? Who can we bash over the head and steal their stuff from? There are people there to help them too from that country. And they're not, attacking them as soon as they get off the boat. They're there going, oh my God, we finally got away. This is official now. Like, we've gotten away from the war. We've gotten away from the famine. Now the most important thing is us as a family. And you see that. And, I think if people watch that bit, which we have, it's about 3 minutes and 35 seconds in the documentary, it humanizes. It goes, wait a minute, these are people too, just like you and I. What is their first initial instinct? Survival and being with their family and friends and making sure everyone lived and everyone is together and safe. That's all they're looking for. They're not going to try to make things more unsafe by all of a sudden going, okay, give me your wallet.
Yeah, let me use this currency I probably don't even know how to use or where to go with.
Exactly. It's like, okay, let me go to this place where I don't speak the language probably either. Like a lot of these people are going to Greece, for example, and many other countries that are just as far away as possible as they can get to by boat. They don't speak the language, but they're just trying to get away. That's how bad their situation is. I mean, which one of us would go, oh yeah, okay, I don't speak Arabic. I would love to be dropped off in Jordan right now. Yeah, I could totally survive.
The weather's
that sounds
really
great.
Nice there, so.
Yeah, super nice and warm. Why not? No, hell no. I mean, That's how dire the situation is back at their homeland, is that at that point, it doesn't matter. They will do that if they have to.
Yeah, I like to, if I'm going to liken the refugee crisis to a game, I would imagine it's like Conan Exiles. You're dropped off into this area, you got no clothes, you have no idea where you're going, you have to then fashion your clothes, you gotta find a weapon, you have to find a food source, you gotta get shelter for yourself. Like, you're not gonna go in there and be like, oh, I'm gonna go to that house I just walked by and try to like steal their shit, right? It's like, no, hold on, I wanna create my own safe haven somewhere, and I gotta get my bearings, I gotta figure out what's going on, and meanwhile the sun is beating down on me and I'm hungry.
Exactly right. And actually, Kate in chat mentions too, I like to think of life as a good book. The further you get into it, the more it starts to come together and make sense. And so it's like the more we get past this folk psychology of what a refugee is, what the refugee crisis is, especially through works of art like from Ai Weiwei, the more we understand it, the richer the story, the better things tend to make sense, because we're actually giving it the time and attention it deserves. And now talking about art as well, you know, going from the humanitarian art now to talking about art plagiarism.
Oh, the dark side of the art.
That's right, the dark side of the arts. And that has more than one meaning, of course, in this sense, as a French artist calls out Disney for plagiarizing his work for the Star Wars posters for Solo, a Star Wars story. So if you don't know, of course, more recently than not, Disney had announced that they would be, of course, doing the Solo story and the Han Solo story. And they released a little teaser trailer, but also some absolutely gorgeous promotional posters. And they were so gorgeous and so engaging that people wrote articles about it and started talking about it. There was a bunch of hype on Twitter and on other social media platforms talking about how awesome of a job they did for the posters and why they did what they did and the choices and stuff in the art behind it. Little did these articles know, and many know, that evidently a French artist by the name of Hachim Bahous actually inspired those works, even though he didn't mean to. As you can see actually in the picture on Twitch here, what he had done was in 2015, he actually created a series of album covers. And they now, as you look side by side to the new Solo posters, have a very uncanny resemblance, such as the typography, such as the colors, the choice of colors and where they're used, how basically the image is composed based off of the lettering being used, like Solo in comparison to the funk album, or Lando in comparison to the jazz album, and just how everything ties together. It's basically an identical ripoff.
It's really amazing. Like even the color, like gradients, the color shade, like unbelievable.
Oh yeah, and you know, he said too that the artist said he was flattered, but commented that copying without his permission would not be tolerated. He expressed his wishes for his work to be credited and paid for accordingly if they moved forward with this. Now, Disney claims, of course, that it wasn't their fault. That basically it was done by a third-party vendor, and you know, once this was brought up to him, they would be investigating this matter further with this third-party vendor. And so, of course, with this, Disney has also released a new set of posters with where each character remains with a unique color, but the large bold lettering was eliminated. Now, the issue, of course, is that the colors are still the same. The artistic styling is still the same, but instead of having the picture come through the words, it's now just a full picture. But basically everything is still pretty much identical otherwise. So, you know, we've seen this plagiarism, though, so many times. And it's funny enough because this isn't the first time Disney actually has been in hot water for taking someone's artwork. We actually dug through the interwebs and found that in 2013, an artist claimed that Disney stole her artwork that she had created back in 2012 while in university. It looks as Disney took the artwork inspired by Alice in Wonderland and placed it on cosmetic bags as well as altered it for a t-shirt design. So now if you look in the center image there for the live stream, you'll notice her artwork is on the left-hand side if you're facing this, the screen here, which is closest to me. And the artwork that was then replicated onto the cosmetic bag is on the right, closest to Tatiana. So as you can see, it's a direct ripoff.
It's amazing. It's like the same image.
And they legit just pulled it and just went, poof. Let's put that onto a bag. Let's add some additional kind of filigree on the outside. Let's put the, basically the Cheshire cat on the outside of it too real quick. And then we'll call it our own because we've done enough changes to it. When clearly it is a complete ripoff.
Yeah, third party. I love that excuse that they gave too. Oh, well, we just hired somebody off of Fiverr and like that's what we got. And I'm like, you're Disney. You got people in-house doing this shit. What?
Yeah, like you have a whole house of animators and designers and don't give me that excuse of, oh, well, we didn't know any better.
Oh, oops.
Like, just because you're not a marketing firm doesn't mean that you don't know anything about design. You've been doing cartoons for how long now? Get the hell out of here.
It's just like it's literally the same thing. It's like somebody, and okay, look, as an artist, as a graphic artist, but as an artist in general, right? We can all attest to like being inspired by other work, right? Like it's hard not to get inspired, right? Writers get inspired. I mean, how many renditions of The Lord of the Rings haven't we seen, or Dungeons and Dragons, or games, like everywhere, right? So it's hard not to get inspired by what you see, what you read, what you hear, what you play. But then you can't just duplicate it. It's a difference between being inspired and then literally doing the exact same work. Mm-hmm. With just a little bit of a twist. And from such a big company like Disney. What? That's just that's amazing. Like, not that I would condone it for a smaller company, but like, all right, they wanted to cut corners and they hired some intern and they were like, I can't come up with anything creative, and they went online and found this guy's stuff and they were like, okay, I'll just make the same thing. Nobody will know. This is Disney. They pay their people, right? I mean, I'm assuming if you work for Disney, they don't pay you. Let us know. But
well, and this is not only a huge issue that's been happening for years now, since technology has evolved so drastically against artists. But I mean, it's been happening in the film industry for decades now with screenwriters. These screenwriters will go up to a company like Paramount or Sony or what have you. Paramount is the most notorious. And there goes my future job aspirations at Paramount. No, I'm just kidding. But, they've been notorious, actually, and been sued multiple times by screenwriters who said, hey, I had a meeting with you people to talk about my screenplay, and you were all like, oh, no, we don't think it would work, but thanks so much, or we'll keep you in mind. They have someone then take the idea and everything that was shared, have them rewrite it and go, oh, well, yours just happens to be similar, but someone else wrote this. So, this isn't, because it's one of their people that's in-house. So they pay them, based on hourly or based on, an actual salary. But they don't have to pay the rights and everything else over to this artist, which would actually be a shit ton more money. They don't have to make any splits or anything in the profit, so they actually can make more money from doing this. And they've been doing this for years. And so this isn't anything new, but it's just that it doesn't get the attention that it should, because people look at the outcome and are still happy with it and go, oh, okay, well, this is cool, whatever. At least I was able to consume it and enjoy it. But again, the artist doesn't get the benefit of their hard work. They can't live off that. If we don't have them there, we don't have the stuff to consume. I mean, that's the whole point. Like, hello. Like, if you don't have farmers, they can't make the food. They can't grow the food. Are you going to go out there and grow the food? No. Are you going to go out there and do a screenplay or do, drawings or something like that? No. So then, give more credit to the artist. That's so important right now. And before we go any deeper into this, we got a bunch of stuff in chat. I don't know if you want to read some of it off, Tatiana.
Yes. Welcome, Denise the Grease, by the way, to the channel. Let's see. Cade says, I don't think it's right to just accept it because then the company will continue to think it's okay to steal. Right. Because Disney kind of went back and like made a little bit of a change, but really it's the same artwork, technically speaking. And if we just say, oh, okay, Disney, that's cool. A little slap on the hand, you're fine. Then they're just going to keep on doing this in the future.
Well, it's because they got this, big man on campus mentality where it's like, well, we have all this money. You're one individual. You go ahead and try to sue us. We'll be able to pay everything off, and we could even settle and pay you less money than if we didn't settle and you end up supposedly somehow winning the case. Like, it's cheaper for us just to settle out of court and we get the rights and we can do whatever the hell we want now. So they don't care because they have basically, huge pockets.
Right, and Touch Me Nancy says that, right? In my opinion, they have enough money to pay for the lawsuit to cover it and then make profit even after paying for the suit.
Oh, yeah.
And then what are they going to say to the audience? Oh, what, you're not going to watch the Han Solo movie now? No, we're still probably going to watch Han Solo movie, So it's hard because, we talk a lot about choosing with our wallet, if you will, right? Choosing the game, choosing the politician, etc. But it's hard to do this in this case because I'm not gonna not watch this movie now, right? All of this other people's hard work went into it. It sucks because it's like then if I boycott this movie because of Disney's massive mishap with their marketing, then I'm screwing over all these other people's hard work, right? So that's also hard. But at the same time, they're basically getting away with it, right? That sucks.
Oh yeah, and they're going to keep getting away with it because there's so many diehard people for Disney overall because of the impact the cartoons had on them as a child that literally Disney can do no wrong. And I've met many of these people, and I'm not saying they're bad people or anything like that, but I knew a lot of people back when I was in college, actually. I was in the theater program there, and they were so hardcore with Disney, and if you said something negative about them, it was the end of the world. They were ready to fight.
Wow.
Like, they were just so into it because of the stories, because of how they grew up and everything else. But, they get stuck on that emotional attachment, forgetting about the logical, forgetting about, well, what is this company actually doing? And we mentioned this actually several weeks back as well in a previous episode where we talked about how Disney bought out Fox. And the impact of the films that will happen now because they've done that, right? So now they have the rights to Deadpool, they have the rights to all these different facets, and the impact of that. But we also talked about how Disney, for Anaheim, California, basically has, they've brought a lot of jobs to the area and everything else, but they're not paying what they should. They're not investing into the city the way they should be. And so the city itself hasn't seen any growth, but Disney has seen massive growth. They've seen, they've gone by leaps and bounds, but the city itself has received no benefit from it. And basically Disney has kind of held them hostage because of it. And there's been a lot of drama about that. There was also the case where Disney actually kept the LA Times from reviewing their films for a while because the LA Times was panning some of their films, and it wasn't that they were doing it on purpose. They were just like, these weren't really great. These weren't very good. So, we gave you our honest opinion and you didn't like it. Now you want to try to ban us from reviewing your other films.
Yeah, well, you're clearly not a fan of these types of films, so why would you hang around?
Oh, yeah. Well, and I'm curious, too, because Wrinkle in Time, which is a Disney film, is getting panned pretty badly. They said the director did it as best as she could, but you could see that there was a major conflict between what Disney wanted and what the director wanted, and it's gotten hit pretty hard. And so there's that drama, too. So because of that, who's going to get backlash from Disney next?
Yeah, and to go on that small tangent, that movie looks like crap. I'm sorry. I'm sorry if you watched it and you love it. I did not see it, but from the trailer, it just looked like crap. And that's unfortunate because I think the book was pretty good. Off rant.
But yeah, well, and Cade mentions too, real quick, as a designer myself, I enjoy being inspired by others' work, but if you pick up another work and add a couple of flowers and call it yours, It's just damn rude. And it really is too. I mean, it's really messed up to think. Again, inspiration, arts are are a communicative style to help inspire you, to help tell a story. So if you pick up and run with it, and writing does the same thing, right? You can read a novel by Ernest Hemingway and really be inspired by some of his character develop or word choices or how he described a specific landscape or scene. But it doesn't mean you then take it word for word, right? You don't do that. You then go, okay, well, what were the elements that made this so impactful to me? So I could better understand the mechanics behind it and the psychology behind it and utilize that rather than just going, oh, that looks nice. I'm not really going to take the time to understand the mechanics of it and why, and I'm just going to then manipulate it and call it my own.
Right. It's a difference between fiction and fan fiction to some degree. You know, it's not like you're rewriting. You're writing a different story based on the characters, but if you were then to sell that, kind of questionable. And now, what do you think about things like stock imagery or stock sites, you know, where you can get basically a pre-made graphic design of your choosing and then use it in your own artwork?
Well, for one thing, let me just throw out the fact that thanks to doing marketing now for so many years and seeing so many damn stock images, I can't tell you how many websites I see and go, oh, that's a stock image. No, that's a stock image. Oh, that's a stock image. They want you to think that's their team. It's not their team. That's also a stock image. Or, oh, you think that's a client or that this is the person running the site. No, it's a stock image. It's not the actual person. That is something that they found and then said it was their face. So, I mean, I already see a lot of moral issues with stock imagery in a sense, or just in general, like, you just after a while, you just know it and you're like, oh my God, not this image again, for God's sake. But, it's tough, right? Because to a certain point, the artist, the photographer or whatever, or the designer, if it's like, say, a 3D rendering or something like that, which a lot more stock images are becoming graphic based too and being shared out. I think it's okay as long as the artist is okay with it, right? If they say, hey, these are the terms and conditions and, there's a creative license that says, you can use it, but you cannot alter it. And as long as people abide by that, fine. Now, if they take it and alter it and that agreement is not there, then yeah, of course there's an issue with that. Because again, they're going against the terms, the actual terms or the creative licensing for that image. And because it's through websites like Shutterstock, let's say, or Pexels or whatever, or Raw Pixel, those sites are a business and they have their own terms and conditions too. So if you break that and they catch that, not only can the artist come after you, but also those websites too. And they list everything out there for you. So that's going to hold up pretty well in the court of law. So again, it's all about, you got to be careful, and especially actually as a creative, as a person who creates content, always be careful of what you're using. Don't just strip it and think you can just run with it, right? If someone sees it and they see that you're somehow making money off that image, even if it's an ad, but you're still using it and eventually could lead to sales down the line for you, you're going to get sued. They're going to give you basically what is the term? I can't think of the legal term now. Like a cease and desist? Is that what it is?
Yeah, I think there's a something.
Yeah, it's a cease and desist, basically, to not use that imagery anymore, that it was copywritten. Now, luckily, there are a lot of things being placed in different platforms like YouTube and Twitch, actually, that will go, hey, you know what? This is actually copywritten. You're not allowed. Now, a lot of it is typically audio, but YouTube specifically, a lot of times too, will look at it and go, oh wait, no, this visual content too is something that's not yours. And because you have monetization on, you're technically making money from that, so this isn't allowed. So we'll demonetize you. Now, of course, there's certain issues that people have with that, and there's a lot of gray areas. But, looking at it from a very strict perspective, if you have it in there and you're not adding your own value to it and making it your own work and just calling someone else's art yours, that's a huge issue. And so again, be careful with stock imagery, be careful with just taking stuff and thinking like, oh, they'll never find out, because you can really hurt yourself that way.
And Mongo has a great point in chat as well. In terms of Disney, that's what happens when you put companies on a pedestal. They think they can become immune to certain criticism and standards, but at the end of the day, they're just a business, just like any other. Pretty much.
Yeah, it's like they got to make a profit, but they also want to try to save as much money as possible because they realize it's not about jacking prices, because to a certain extent, there's a certain ceiling that they'll hit where people will stop absolutely buying their stuff, or it's not that they don't want to, but they just can't afford it overall. So how else can they make additional money so the CEOs can be happy and the investors can be happy and everything else? Well, what that takes is cutting corners then. And unfortunately, a lot of times, the rights to different pieces of work and everything can be very expensive. So they'll try to utilize that as a corner to cut. Now, luckily, they were caught with this and called out for it. But yeah, will any actual actions happen? It's hard to say, especially, again, as they have a lot of money, and especially as they say, well, we made the change, right? Like, we tried taking it on as soon as we were aware of it. And so it's going to be a tricky situation overall. But again, this isn't anything new. If you search for art plagiarism, you will find hundreds of articles of companies who have taken artists' artwork, put it on t-shirts, coffee mugs, and all other different kinds of paraphernalia and swag to try to sell. Actually, just recently, and if Denunji's still here, she knows about this because I learned it from her, but a tattoo artist created a very epic Overwatch tattoo that involves all the women of Overwatch. So Mercy, Diva, Sombra, and what have you. And it was a beautiful art piece. Well, that picture of the tattoo got shared around, and someone who runs an online company took it, put it on a t-shirt, started selling it.
Uh-oh.
So now there's a lot of drama going around on Twitter about that tattoo, and there's side-by-sides you could tell is a very clear identical ripoff, and that they're trying to sell this tattoo artist stuff. And even the tattoo artist is speaking out on it, and many others are speaking out on it, saying, you need to take this t-shirt down. This is not your artwork unless you want to pay the artist for a portion of the sales you're making off those t-shirts.
Damn.
So if you want to look up a sort of smaller scale art theft, but to see the most recent in what's going on with what artists have to face, there you go. And that's the reason why a lot of times artists don't want you to take pictures of their stuff at events, because their concern is that someone is going to take that image, manipulate it, put it on a t-shirt or put it on a coffee mug or put it somewhere else and try to sell it. Or if you try to share it out there, someone else will find it and then try to manipulate it for their own benefit. Because typically you think, well, why not? Like, share the artwork out there, get it out there so people know who you are. But the problem is, a lot of times the artwork surpasses the artist. So, one tweet is the artwork with the artist's name, and all of a sudden 3 tweets down, it's just the artwork without the artist. And then there tends to be this growing separation between the artwork and who the artist was in the first place. And it becomes harder and harder to figure out who it was that created it. Like, where that connection is becomes so muddied and dissipated that all of a sudden the artwork is its own thing.
That's crazy. And it's so much easier. It's so easy to do nowadays thanks to digital things, digital devices that can just capture a likeness. Like, it was much harder to do back in the day, right? But nowadays you can just quickly snap a photo, send it globally somewhere else, and manipulate. You can even manipulate things in your phone. There's apps, right? You just manipulate, boom, and then be like, oh, this is mine. Share it on Instagram. It's nuts. It's totally nuts. Well, speaking of another company that is it's growing too big for its britches, but somebody's trying to do something about it, and we're talking about Uber. That's right, our friendly, I think, is it a word now? Is it a word in the dictionary?
Uber?
To Uber? Is it official?
I don't know if it's that big yet, but I know ride sharing is the most common, for that type of system. I know a lot of people are saying Uber, but because of all the lawsuits and stuff, a lot of people have actually been saying I'm going to catch a Lyft. So, I mean, it's hard to say.
It's sort of like how I think a Post-it became the go-to for Post-its now, just the brand itself. But anyways, Uber. So if you don't know, Uber is a ride-sharing app, right? You, as the driver, log in and you say, hey, I have a car, I can take you somewhere. And then you, as the user, log into Uber and say, hey, I gotta go somewhere, who's got a car, right? And they connect the two people. So Uber itself doesn't actually really do much of anything at all. It's literally just like, here's a texting app.
Oh yeah, what's
join
amazing?
With someone, right?
Like, so many people point out that some of the largest companies right now don't own a damn thing. Like,
right.
They don't own the service that they do. Like Uber with the cars, with the kind of taxing service, Airbnb, which is basically where anyone can just rent out a piece of their property for people to stay in. And so Airbnb doesn't own any hotels. They don't own any bread and breakfasts. But they, again, have this digital platform to connect people to do so.
Yeah. Obviously we've heard a lot of back and forth between Uber and cities and Uber and countries where they've been like, the taxi services are like, look, we have to pay all these licensing fees and we have to go through all of these checks and balances to get a taxi cab company up and running in a city, in a country, that kind of thing. And meanwhile, with Uber, they don't pay anything, right? They just pay some money to the drivers, and that's it. So, they don't have to do, insurance for the drivers. There's no perks, there's no benefits, because their drivers are independent contractors. So for that, you don't need to provide any of the usual benefits that you would provide your employees, the way that cab companies do. So their costs are, of course, much lower, which makes it a viable alternative to the users who are trying to save a little bit of money. And it also provides a way for people who just want to do this part-time. They don't have to, go through the rigorous background checks of being, of applying for a taxi company and then, having to work at it for a set number of hours and all that stuff, right? So Uber is kind of skirting a lot of things, and that's why they're also more affordable in that sense. Now, cab companies and the people that work for them, naturally, like, they're upset. I would be too, right? Like, if your career is taxi driver and now somebody is coming along and not only are they offering a cheaper service, but they're also not really offering, they're skirting some of the things they have to do, like licensing, like benefits for their workers, that kind of thing. That's even more upsetting because you can't even go to the competition because you're not going to get the same stuff, right? You're not going to be able to necessarily provide for your family in the same manner. So it's really, in a way, right, it's like they're stealing your job. So I get why they're upset. Now, as a user of things like Uber and Lyft, mostly Lyft, it's hard because I see the benefits and I want them, but at the same time, I get it. I get that it's shady as fuck at the same time. So one particular city has had enough. Istanbul, their taxi drivers have now taken Uber to court, and they're accusing the company of endangering their livelihoods, and it could actually crimp Uber's business because it's Europe's largest city. So Uber has now, it's not the first time, right? They've been receiving court action and restrictions and bans and protests from taxi services like all over the world, right? This is just another one that gets added to the list. But I think it's picking up momentum, right? There's public sentiment on social media that appears to be in favor of Uber. There's like hashtags that are like hashtag I don't use taxis or hashtag don't touch Uber. Because, the users of Uber are kind of fed up with the rough, quote unquote, manners and maybe the reckless driving of some of the conventional cabbies, right? They inflate fares on routes. There's like stench of cigarettes in their vehicles, so they like the alternative of Uber. But taxi drivers are still frustrated, right? Because, again, as we mentioned, Uber drivers don't have to pay the costs that they do, like paying for number plates for taxis. They and some other stuff. So, and Uber doesn't offer the benefits that a cab company would, like medical insurance or sick time, paid leave, all that other stuff. So some taxi drivers have sort of taken it also a step further. Private broadcaster reported that a group of taxi drivers would hail an Uber car so they could beat up the driver and damage the vehicle, right? So at that point, it's like they're not even really going after the company because, as we mentioned, the company doesn't own anything. They don't own fleets. They don't have employees. So they're going after the individual contractors and their cars to make a point, right? So it's rough. Now, Denmark and Hungary have shut down Uber, and Morocco actually suspended their operation. So it looks like, at least in Europe, they're starting to crack down on Uber because either the taxi cab companies are using their sort of violence to, quote, solve the problem, unquote, or because the countries themselves are because, Uber also isn't without its faults in terms of the drivers, right? Or the passengers. Like, there's been instances where Uber drivers have attacked and assaulted their passengers, and vice versa. So it's not like Uber has eliminated sort of this negativity against, you're getting into someone else's car. Who knows what you're going to get, right?
Yeah.
Who knows what's going to happen? But Europe is cracking down on Uber. So, the question is here, what do we think is going to happen with ride sharing in the future? Like, obviously there's alternatives to Uber. There's Lyft, which tends to be, at least in the US, a little bit better. There's also other alternatives that are very niched. Like, there's ride sharing apps that are tailored towards the safety of women. So there's like women drivers only. There's other ride-sharing apps that are specifically made for like picking up kids after school. So there's a lot of different, in a way, competitors. Obviously a little bit more niched, but they are competitors to Uber specifically that don't tend to have this much
drama attached to it.
Yes.
Yeah, basically, you have Lyft, you have Fasten, you have many other companies, and especially companies similar to those, but that are very niche. Like, there is a ride share that was created in Massachusetts that's specifically for women, so women feel safe by themselves going from one point to another. There's also another one being created in Massachusetts, too, that is for children. So if you're not able to pick up your kids, you have this system where you can get specific drivers who have gone through all the processes that they need to, background checks and what have you, that are fully trusted, that can be, again, the kind of taxi for your children from, like, say, school to soccer practice or from soccer practice to home and what have you. So again, just to kind of summarize all this again, what we're seeing is that in many countries, including Istanbul, Uber's getting a lot of backlash. A lot of it is, again, from the taxi industry because, again, a lot of these taxi industries are a lot of these places where the bans are happening in very well-populated, traveled-to areas. For instance, our background is in Boston, where we lived for quite so many years. And in the city of Cambridge, which is just north of Boston, they actually completely outright banned Lyft and Uber drivers. Now, did that stop them from actually going there? No. But basically, if you were caught, you would get ticketed because their taxi drivers put up enough fuss because there are so many people visiting the city of Cambridge because Harvard is there, MIT is there, many different businesses, especially tech industry businesses and stuff like that are right there in Cambridge. And so it's a lot of good money for the taxi industry, especially as they've been taking a hit. And so, of course, they're backlashing going, oh, well, we have all these fees we have to pay. We have all these, different licenses we have to go through. Uber, Lyft, Fasten, all these other companies, they don't have to pay all that. So that's, ridiculous. Plus, you guys are doing, basically, you're way undercutting us and there's no way we can compete. Now, what seems like instead of many of these taxi services then changing it up and seeing what else they can do, because we talked about good leadership, right? You need to be able to not fear change, be able to adapt, be able to communicate, be able to empathize. And it feels like, at least in my perspective, that a lot of these taxi companies are just stuck in old ways. And so slowly they've been starting to incorporate new technology like TVs. They'll take, your card and stuff. You could process it right in the back of the car there. But they're not thinking about how can they make it more affordable and more impactful to the end user. They're just like, well, how can we make things easy so we can still get money? And so they have this old time mentality and they're not adapting to the current age. So, it's like, well, is Uber to blame here? Are these tech industries to blame here? Or is it these industries that just aren't adapting like they should at the same time?
Those are very good questions, because it's, Uber just made an app, right? That's basically all they did.
Right.
And they didn't think about the implications of, the far-reaching implications of this as they grew. Like, they didn't think about scaling up. And then, it's always harder to go backwards, right? Like, what are they going to do? Start hiring employees? Like, no.
Right.
And whenever you have independent contractors, that's also, and I'm not really sure how that works really in every other global company, but in the US, you don't have to do the least squat for independent contractors. You just have to pay them for services rendered, period, end of story. There's nothing else really. And if they leave, no problem. You can find another one super quick. So they don't have any sort of turnover costs that they have to worry about either. And if somebody doesn't want to use their app because they feel unsafe, that's okay. They have millions of other people who do. So for them, they probably, they heard the drama up until this point, but they're probably like, it's okay. It'll work itself out, right? Whatever. So it's nice to see that somebody is actually doing something about them and forcing their hand to change something. Now, we can't say that the people who work for Uber as independent contractors, they're also at fault, right? Because they've bought into the system. The users, they're also at fault because they bought into the system. But also the taxi drivers, the taxi cab companies, they're also at fault for like doing things like this violence. Like, I mean, change, adapt with the times. I don't know how, but they know their industry better. But they're not doing anything to change their stale, practices either. Instead, they're resorting to, well, I'm just gonna attack this thing until it goes away, and then back to normal, back to status quo. So everybody's at fault here, as far as I can tell. And, people who didn't like riding in taxi cabs before because of they felt unsafe, or the environment of the cab itself was not good, or whatever like that, like, well, then they should have complained to the company. They should have gotten, a bunch of people involved and made them change it. So it's like one of those things where nobody thought about long term, or maybe they did and ignored it, and now we're here, and now we have to deal with this mess.
Oh yeah, well, and again, you pointed out the complaints of the people, and yeah, like in Turkey too, they said, we're tired of the rough manners that the drivers have, the reckless driving, how they keep picking routes that keep inflating the fare costs. And, other things like, for instance, the environment of the car itself, like the stench of cigarettes and all that. But with Uber, because there is a star system, you rate everyone. So the drivers get rated, but also the people taking the ride get rated as well, based on their personality, based on the environment that they create and everything else. So, unfortunately, the taxi system has not implemented a system like this. If they said, hey, you know what, look at this, drivers, if you go below 4 stars, guess what? You're going to keep getting the shitty, people, the shitty passengers that keep getting rated 3 to 2 stars, and you'll have to deal with that.
Well, that's what they do.
Yeah, so, well, not with taxi drivers, though.
Oh, right.
But I'm saying if they implemented a system like Uber, because that's why Uber, Lyft, and many of these rideshare systems tend to work and people are happy because they look at how they were graded and go, yes, I want a 5-star driver and this is how I can get it. Great.
Right.
You know, and it's based off of quality. I've seen so many Uber drivers treat their damn car like a hotel. It's crazy.
Oh my goodness,
it's
right?
It's like, oh, here's some mint. Oh, would you like a coffee? Hey, I have an espresso machine in the back. Want to get you, a quick one?
Floral scented, there's light jazz playing, and I'm like, damn. Can I give you 6 stars? Like, what?
Oh, yeah, and you never get that at all in a taxi cab. Never at all.
No, and you don't know who's coming. At least with the Uber or Lyft, you know they give you a nice little photo, maybe fake, maybe not, who knows? But you get a photo, you see what the car license plate is, you see where they're at. Like it just provides that extra safety.
Oh yeah, and actually for systems like Lyft, they have like a little bio section, so you can share like what's your favorite music, what are some things that you do, and that's both for the drivers and the passengers. So it makes it a much more comfortable experience for everyone involved.
Exactly, and I think that's a great idea. That would be such, it would be such an easy thing, I think, to implement. I say this with little to no knowledge of coding an app, but I feel like everybody's got an app nowadays. Like, how hard is it to to make your own taxi app? Taxis are us.
And people have been burned by taxis so often, where they go, they call up and go, okay, it'll be there in 30 minutes. An hour later, they're still waiting, and they have to call them and go, hey, where's my driver at? Whereas with the apps, you could track them. You could go, okay, they're currently stuck in traffic. I know what's going on. Great. I feel more at ease. I'm not as uppity or anxious or pissed off about the situation. Or I can see, okay, they're 2 minutes away. Great. But you don't get that with a taxi company.
Right.
There's no communication, and that's a problem.
Right. And then, I've definitely used taxi cabs where, not that I'm okay with them not talking to me. Like, I don't need to have a conversation on my ride to something. I'm fine. But they're often talking on the phone with someone else. And I kind of want to be like, listen, can you fucking pay attention to the road, dude? Dudette, like, can you not? This is your job. Like, can you imagine being at your job and, going somewhere and ordering some food and someone's just, like, on their phone while you're ordering your food? Like, that's rude, yo. Plus, you're driving. Fucking pay attention to the road. So, it's... and they have gotten away with such stuff before. So that's on the taxi cab companies. They're not willing to change. They are not good leaders.
Oh yeah, well, and this is the thing too, that you have to look at the clear separation between the drivers and the companies. So like, we can't blame, of course, then to look at it from the other side, the drivers for the lack of growth and innovation. We have to look at the companies. So I could see why the taxi drivers are so infuriated though, because they don't want to have to work for Lyft or Uber full time now. Because one is the fact that, again, as we mentioned, no benefits, lower pay. Now they have to learn a whole new system. They got to start using their own car rather than the taxi company's car. And all this other stuff that's attached to it. You got to be your own business. So that means that as an independent contractor, you have to actually do your taxes in a different way and do it as an independent company or as a sole proprietor of a company or whatever. So that makes things even more complex. And that means that you have to also give the government more money. Even more money than you had to before, because now technically you're owning your own business. And that's the frustrating thing. And if you think you're going to get any assistance or help with your taxes or anything else from companies like Lyft or Uber, it ain't going to happen. Their focus is on the ride itself. Whatever you do as an independent contractor, because that's what you are, that's on you. That is your responsibility. And, so it can really hit a family hard, especially if you just came over, let's say from Somalia, where, like a lot of these drivers are from different countries. And, they looked at as, these people who don't have the skill set, even though maybe they were a doctor in their country, but they can't get the jobs here that they want because they went to school in a different country. So it all of a sudden doesn't count. And so now they have to drive a taxi around. And, of course, what hits them then is that, well, I can't do anything else, right? And it's really tough for them. But they have this one job to supply for their families. So I can get why they can get frustrated and pissed off, right? I mean, that in a way makes sense, but it's also what they do with it then. But I have known many taxi drivers. I've spoken to several who said, oh yeah, I'll do like an 8-hour run and then I'll do another 4 or 5 hours with Lyft or Uber.
Yeah, so I'm going to have about 6 to 7 jobs in one day. Or they'll have, it's crazy, I've seen them too, they'll at least people who do the Uber and Lyft, they'll have like both apps up and they'll have like two separate phones, and then it's like, okay, whoever gets to them first, kind of a thing. And now I've driven for Uber back like very early on when they first started, I think, and it was weird because it didn't feel, I mean, I felt no connection to the company, you know. It was just like, oh great, like I turn my app on and this is what happens. And it was neat because I got to meet a lot of interesting people, a lot of interesting life stories. I actually once drove somebody to a bank so that they could take out...
Not so they could rob it, right?
No.
Oh.
Well, I don't know what they did, but they came back with a lot of cash. No, they were like students from a different country. This was back when I was in Boston. And they were going out shopping, so they were like, yeah, we're gonna make a quick like, if you can just drop us off at the bank, or like, you know, let's stop at the bank real quick, and then we gotta pick up some cash. And I was like, oh, okay, like that makes sense. They literally came out with, I'm not even joking, like wads of money, and I was like, what the fuck? And you know, then I had to drop them off at Copley, and it's interesting because they had so much money, and I was like fully on expecting a tip, like an actual physical tip or something, you know. And no, but you know, but like I got to meet a lot of interesting people. I helped people like, you know, with their groceries and like going from a supermarket to a house. And somebody who had like, they went to teach a class, and like he was like, can we do this every Saturday? You know, and like it was interesting because, you know, I had a lot of good experiences as a driver with the people. With the company, that was a different matter. First, because they gave you, back in the day, they gave you a phone, an iPhone, and you had to use their iPhone. And what they didn't tell you is that you were paying for that iPhone.
Oh.
So they took that from your earnings, but then like nowhere was that written, right? And then they had an update to the iPhone, and then they were like, oh, well, actually now you can use your own phone. And I remember I had to go to like this hotel that they all like had rented out a room from, and like show them that I had an iPhone or had a phone that could use their app so that I could return the iPhone. And that's when I found out that, oh, I've been paying for it this whole time. It was just like, it was some shady practices. And then just everything in their communication with you was very, as a driver, it was like slimy. That's like the best word I can use to describe it. And I remember going to the hotel thing too. By the way, it was like a conference room. It wasn't like some weird like little dinky hotel room. Like they had a whole conference room. But I remember going in there and standing in line, and I was one of like maybe 10 women and like the hundreds of men that were there as drivers. So that was interesting too, just to like the gender demographic. But yeah, people would come into my car and they'd be like, oh my God, like it was great from that perspective. But the company itself was terrible. Like I eventually just stopped working for them. I think I only worked up until I managed to actually pay off an iPhone or whatever it was. I was like so pissed off, like fuck this shit. But I do take Lyft a lot.
That's been a pretty good experience, yeah.
Yeah.
And actually, people are sharing some of their experiences in chat. Jesse, who's out of Ohio, says, so in my city, it takes like an hour for a cab to show, and sometimes they don't show. The cabs are filthy. The cab drivers here are upset that Uber is here because it's taking their business, but their model is horrible. Exactly right. And that's what we were just talking about. Again, they're in an old system that is refusing to change. And instead of having them change, they want the disruptors, to change. Ironically enough, instead of trying to adapt and adjust, which again goes back to our first topic of good leadership. Who's leading these industries, and are they showing good leadership? Are they listening? Are they empathizing with their customers as well as with their teams? Are they really caring, or are they just trying to squeeze as much life out of this as possible until eventually it expires? You know, you got to wonder about that sometimes, because sometimes, you know, the leaders of these businesses go, well, we're just going to ride it out until it dies because I'm going to get a nice package if this company goes down. And, well, I'm not the driver, so what do I care? So it happens a lot of different industries, and that's what we tend to be seeing now. And Jessie also says, actually, too, on the other flip side, that she is also currently a driver for Lyft on Fridays and Saturdays. So if you're looking for a good ride, that didn't come out right. So if you're looking for a great Uber driver, make sure to look for Jessie on Uber. But all seriousness, though, so that's coming from an Uber driver, too, from someone who's done it, as well as we heard about Tatiana's story. And if any of you also have stories about Uber or Lyft or any of these ride shares, please feel free to share it in chat. Or, of course, also you can share your stories and tweet at us on Twitter, which is at MindMineTV. Or, of course, you can share your images of your experiences somehow on Instagram if you want to at MindMineTV as well.
Mango says, it would feel weird for me to just have random people in my car. It was weird. The thing is, though, as you, the user, can see who the driver is, you, the driver, can see who you're picking up. And you have the choice of picking them up or not. So what happens is your app is on, and then like a little alert will pop up and be like, oh, so-and-so would like to go blah, blah, blah. Here they are. Here's their rating, everything. Do you want to pick them up, basically? And you have, I think I had like 30 seconds back in the day to like say yes or no. And if you say no, great. Then you wait for somebody else to pop up. If you say yes, then that sends that notification over to them. And then they, of course, have the ability to decline you and so on and so forth, right? So you do have at least you kind of get an idea of who it is, more or less. And then at the end of the ride, you, of course, get to rate them as well. But it was weird the first time. Again, like I said, I was pretty lucky. I had really great people. And my first ride was actually, picking up somebody, like helping them with their groceries. So that was it was just neat. I was like, oh, yeah, I'll help you with your groceries. Very nice lady. And Denise says, I always tip my drivers. Always. You're amazing. You're like a 6 stars right there. I do know with Uber, I think they weren't allowed to tip at first. I'm not sure if they do that now. Like I said, I usually use Lyft now, and I know with Lyft you can tip your drivers, and I remember being amazed at that, and I was like, oh man, I wouldn't gotten tipped so much back in the day when I worked with Uber. Because I was the hotel car right there. But again, it's nice to see that at least, it sounds like from what I have spoken with Lyft drivers, it sounds like Lyft is a better company to work for than Uber. And I know that they also, I can't remember something happened in Boston where there was some event or something like that, and Lyft actually said, okay, like we won't go in for that event for something or other. Like they're much more, it felt like they were much more aware of what was happening in the world around them and acted accordingly. So good leadership, Lyft, good leadership, as we talked about.
Yeah, and actually, Jessie had a great point, too. She says, if the cabs weren't horrible, then I might feel bad about it. So, for instance, in NYC, I could see why it's an issue. Cabs are everywhere. People are everywhere. So, like, downtown New York, Manhattan, everything else, that makes sense. But for smaller cities, they really do need an Uber and Lyft to get anywhere, especially within a certain amount of time. And the thing is that, it actually helps decrease the number of drunk drivers on the road. I can't tell you, even in Boston, how many people were completely trashed at a bar and we would see stumble into an Uber. And it saved them from actually, walking around, possibly passing out in the street, or having them then get behind a wheel and drive. So there is that benefit as well, which was not an intended benefit, but it definitely helps.
Yes. Exactly. And yes, Denise, customers do have their own rating.